Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Josh Monday Christian and Conspiracy Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Monday. If you don't know me, I'm a Christian rapper, devoted husband, father, and Army veteran. And today I have a very special guest for you today. It's Mark Gober, and he's actually authored a bunch of different books. Mark is the author of the Upside Down series and the seven books spanning the topics of consciousness, politics, economics, UFOs, medicine, cosmology, and more. His first book, An End to an Upside Down Thinking, won the IPPY Award for Best Science Book of the Year and was endorsed by researchers with affiliations at Harvard, Princeton, UVA, and UCSF, among others. And then he has a few other books. If you'd like, Mark, you can kind of, if I don't know if you have, I have a list if you want me to name them off, or you can name them off if you'd like. But yeah, you have an end to an upside down living, an end to an upside down liberty, an end to upside down contact, an end to the upside down reset, an end to the upside down medicine, an end to an upside down cosmos, and you're also the host of Where Is My Mind podcast. I'll do it for you just in case you didn't have them all memorized on the top of your head, bro. How's it going,
Thanks,
Mark?
Josh. I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited, bro, because that's one of my niches is cosmology, and I think you do it from a different perspective. I do it from a biblical perspective, that it is completely upside down from what they teach us. It just like your book says. I mean, it is definitely inverted compared to what they teach us. So I'm very, very excited to have you on. I've been looking forward to this. Man, we already tried to set it up a few times, and it was my fault. You were always ready to go, so not my fault. I mean, we had something happened with my son and all this stuff, but now we're finally here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and yeah, let's go ahead and get it going.
Yeah, this cosmology topic, I think it's super important. It's also the newest one for me. It's my most recent book, the seventh one in the series. And I had heard people over the last few years ask questions about where do we actually live? What's the nature of the cosmos? What's the nature of Earth? But it wasn't until around last spring of 2024, that I started to look into it a bit more seriously. Um, Partially because there are so many topics I've been interested in, and each one requires a lot of thinking and unlearning, and I just hadn't had the time to focus on cosmology. But also there was a book that came out by a theoretical physics PhD named Stephen A. Young. He wrote a book called A Fool's Wisdom. And in that book, he questioned a lot of the mainstream cosmological topics in a way that I had not heard. And he has such a mainstream background. Basically, he was initially setting out to disprove all of the people who said that Earth is not a spinning globe. Basically, he said, well, I'm going to just demonstrate, of course, that it is a spinning globe and conventional cosmology explains things. And he couldn't do it. And then he was left in a place, and I'm paraphrasing what he says in the book, but it's almost exactly this. He says, I can't say with 100% certainty what this place is, but I can say with 100% certainty what it's not. And it's not a spinning globe. From a theoretical physics PhD, I mean, a conventionally trained guy to come out publicly. And I saw some of the arguments he was making, and I said, this is something I have to look into, because if we are fundamentally wrong about where we live, number one, where do we live? And why would that be hidden from us? Why would we be in a state of ignorance? What does that speak about the nature of deception? And that gets to deeper issues of who we are, why we're here, what's the nature of reality. So I felt like I was forced into it. I had to look. And I was, as you might imagine, Josh, a little bit nervous to speak about this topic or even write about it. But when I put the arguments together from a scientific lens, notwithstanding the, let's say, biblical or what the religious traditions have said, because there are many different perspectives from religions dating way back that come to a similar conclusion. If we even leave that aside, from a physics and scientific standpoint, what the mainstream is saying right now doesn't line up. And then when you add what the religious traditions have said for so many years, that the ancients all said the same thing of basically a geocentric Earth is at the center and stationary and not a sphere. I said, okay, I'm going to just put the arguments down, not try to make super strong claims. But what I realized when I was researching is that many people who, let's just say, are arguing for the mainstream cosmology, they don't necessarily know what they're even arguing for. So I wanted to lay it all out and hopefully get the conversation going without putting a stake in the ground saying, I know with certainty what it is. What I'm trying to do more of is trying to demonstrate where we can falsify elements of the current mainstream cosmology. And that points us in certain directions, but I tried to be conservative about it. And that's my book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos.
Yeah, you kind of have to be conservative because I mean, I have a Christian and conspiracy show, but I'm not trying to make a living off this show. This is one of my side things I do. I actually have three shows, but it is I'm swimming uphill without a paddle because I have a Christian and conspiracy show. So, YouTube, everybody obviously doesn't like the stuff that I'm going over, So, but once you do state your claim about the Earth not being what the scientists say it is, that there's a whole group of people, I mean, a giant group of people that will be very, very triggered by that. And if
Yeah.
you're an author, what can happen to you is everything that you've written in the past, right? You've already done six books. This is your seventh. It could just, everybody could just, it could just, totally stop the train that you're running with everybody buying your books and all this stuff. So I could imagine stepping out a leap of faith like that and just because of truth. I'm sure your other stuff was a little controversial. I see there's some stuff that people might have a little issue with, but as soon as you bring up cosmology to somebody and it goes against what they've been like completely believing and indoctrinated with, even though they don't know the model, because most everybody that does get mad and angry like that, if you do ask them, a simple five questions, they're not going to be able to answer it. But probably sometimes, not all the time. But yeah, that is definitely something that, which I really commemorate you for is stepping out and doing that just for truth. And you said you were conservative about it, which I understand completely that you'd have to be that way.
Yeah, basically anything that I'm saying, it's substantiated, and I'm unwilling to try to make assertions that I can't fully back up. So if there's something that's still an inference, I'll say it's an inference, for example. And I've tried to do that with all my books, but like you say, this is a topic for some reason really gets people going. And the book before this one was on medicine, and I'll be careful because we're on YouTube and everything. But that one, I can understand a bit more why people would get upset because they might say, you're giving misinformation that's going to cost people's lives because they're going to read something, even though I'm not even claiming to give medical advice in that book. I'm just laying out research and giving hypotheses and things like that. People could say, well, you're spreading misinformation. That's dangerous. So I can sort of understand that. With cosmology, though, is it really dangerous to ask these questions? And yet people get more upset about it. But I have to tell you, Josh, one of the pleasant surprises so far, maybe because I don't have a massive audience or anything, but the reception has been overwhelmingly positive on this book. Um,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have come to me. I was just speaking at a conference in Texas called Confluence, run by Alex Zeck of The Way Forward and a few other people.
Oh,
750 people
yeah.
attended, and I spoke about cosmology. And it got a super positive reception, even by people who didn't know my work before or who didn't know the topic. So I think maybe the tides are turning a little bit and people are open-minded as long as the topic is framed in a way that people can absorb. So for me, it's like uh, um, I try not to just start off with the conclusion. You know what I mean? I try to work my way up to it, and then people do the math in their mind, and you can see the wheels start to turn, and they're like, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." And then it takes a little bit of time for it to land. And as it sinks in, people start to ask questions. And I've had many people come up to me and they're like, Mark, I don't really know what's the truth about cosmology, but I'm a globe skeptic now because there are too many things that don't line up with the mainstream model of a Big Bang and heliocentrism and a spinning globe. There are too many things. I can't tell you exactly what's true, but I feel comfortable saying something's wrong about the mainstream model.
Yeah.
And
Once
that's a great thing.
Yeah, and that is a great thing, definitely. And people need to be asking questions. And yeah, so the way that I go at it is from a biblical perspective. So as you're kind of going over some of the things that you kind of have unveiled, I would like to definitely, I'll let you know biblically how that lines up as well. So can you kind of go over some of those things? So what are some of the uh consistencies that you saw that were just different from what the mainstream was laying out?
Yeah, and first, I also want to give a preface to you and your audience about the biblical aspect. I'm totally open to that too. And in my book, I mention it a little bit in some of the other scriptures, like the Book of Enoch, others that people have pointed to throughout history. And it's just an area that I have not studied quite as much. So
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
definitely happy to get your feedback and certain lines in the Bible. I know there's an element of the firmament that I do quote, the waters above and the waters below. There are things like that that I am familiar with, but I've heard some debates. There was one, I believe, between Rob Skiba and someone else that were debating the
Um,
details.
Robert St. I think he
Robertson Janis,
he was
yes.
more of
So
a he was more he believes in the globe, but he does believe in geocentricity, but he believes in the full expanse and everything else that goes along with it, you know.
Exactly. So I am somewhat familiar with that stuff, but I
It's
haven't looked at
okay.
it as closely. Just letting you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, no worries. And yeah, that's the thing. You already laid it out that you're coming from a scientific side, a little, you know, so I totally get that. You know, I just well, what I would do just for you is I can lay a as you go over these things, I can lay a groundwork on how that lines up biblically in a way. So I don't want to interrupt you when you are talking, but I'll just wait for you to kind of complete, and I'll say, hey, you know what? These verses actually line up with this as well.
Awesome.
So,
Sounds good.
all right, go ahead.
Yeah, where I like to start is where I don't think this conversation starts often enough. And it's a topic known as dark matter. This is a huge subject in physics. It's where many prizes are being awarded these days for people who try to study these things, and also a lot of the funding is going there for good reason, because basically mainstream cosmology and physics says that 96% of the universe is made of mysterious stuff called dark matter and dark energy. There's only 4% that we understand. That's a big deal because it's assuming a lot that these things exist, that dark matter and dark energy actually exist, and they need to exist in order to prop up so many of our other theories. And that's one of the big points here is that when a model is put forth to us, like we have in mainstream cosmology, they're presupposing things that happened 13.8 billion years ago, a Big Bang. And you need that to occur for this expanding universe that results in Earth as a spinning ball, just one little rock in a massive, massive universe, revolving around this gas giant of a sun and expanding outward at over 1 million miles an hour in an expanding universe. And all the little things in between, you need very specific physics in order to make that happen. And what we're basically told, even though they don't say it this way because it's very damning, they don't tell you, well, yeah, all of those things are true as long as dark matter and dark energy exist in the way that we think. But we don't really understand what they are. Okay? So fast forward, actually go back. It started in 1933. There was an astronomer named Fritz Zwicky. He was looking at a cluster of galaxies in the sky and he saw that things were basically moving too fast. When I say too fast, I mean too fast based on the assumption of Einstein's gravity, known as general relativity. And Einstein's gravity came after Newton's gravity. And that was all trying to explain a very simple thing. If you drop an apple, it falls to the ground. So we know that happens. The question is, why does it happen? Is it because there's a mystical force called gravity where the mass of the earth is so much bigger than the mass of the apple that it's pulling it down? What Newton found is that that sort of works sometimes, but there are instances in which the equations don't fully work. For example, Mercury has a strange motion in the sky around the sun that Newton's gravity does not predict. That's a pretty big deal. If we're going to have some theory of motion and why things are falling, and you can't predict the motion of one of the important lights in the sky, one of the planets, the wandering stars, Mercury, like what's going on here? And so Einstein's relativity, which is basically a revised version of Newton's gravity, says that it's not that the apple falls to the ground because the mass of the Earth is so much greater. It's actually that mass inherently bends and warps space-time. So it's like if you put a ball on a trampoline, you can see it bending the trampoline. Space and time are acting that way, even though space and time are pure abstractions. Let's leave that aside for a second. But all these different masses in the universe, the Earth and the moon and all these things, they're bending and warping space-time in a very specific way, such that things are moving around. That's Einstein's version. Now, going back to what I said about Fritz Zwicky's observation in 1933, he said, wait a second, if we assume Einstein's relativity theory, Einstein's gravity is true, then there's something missing here. There needs to be much more mass in order for these other observations to exist, in order for the equations to hold up. And it wasn't just a little bit of missing mass. It was like over 99% of the mass was missing in order for Einstein's gravity to hold up. So basically, as I see it, there were two options. Option one was we need to start from scratch with regard to this notion of gravity and relativity. We need to understand motion in a new way. Maybe there's some other force or some other element of the cosmos that's causing things to move and things to fall. Or maybe there's just some mass there that we can't see, and we're going to call that dark matter. It's like
Yeah.
plugging it in. And that's basically what's happened since 1933, and scientists have assumed it must be there. The problem is that if it's not there in the way that we think, then the equations are going to start to break down. The predictions will start to break down. And that is what's happening. There is a mainstream astrophysicist named Pavel Krupa. He's at the University of Bonn in Germany. He has his own Wikipedia page. Otherwise, normal guy. He has been testing, along with his colleagues, the predictions that you would expect to be true if dark matter were there. And again, this is part of the 96% of the universe. The other big chunk is dark energy. So this is a very big thing that you can test and say, well, if dark matter existed, we would observe these things in other situations. And he's saying the observations predicted under dark matter are simply not there. And we have falsified dark matter with more than 5 sigma confidence. That's more than 99.99999% confidence, meaning, as he says, it's not there. And he has
Yeah.
said things like, we have to rethink Einstein's gravity. This is such a big deal because think about how much of all of physics is based on a very specific theory of gravity, whether it's Newton's approximation or the more refined version of Einstein's general relativity. It all hinges on dark matter. People don't talk about it that way. So you see, if dark matter doesn't exist, then you end up with a house of cards. And then the second thing I want to say before I pause here is that mainstream physics relies on two leading theories. One is general relativity, which, as we just discussed, has big problems. But in mainstream thinking, they say this is one of the core predicted theories that works well. The other is the quantum realm, quantum physics. So quantum physics is believed to work at the very small scale. Relativity theory is believed to work at the very, very big scales, and they allegedly work well independently. But when you bring them together, they don't work. Metaphorically speaking, the equations blow up. As Michio Kaku, who's a mainstream physicist, he said that there's a crisis in cosmology, that we are off right now by a factor of 10 to the 120th power. That's one with 120 zeros after it. And I give you and your audience this preface because anyone who tells you, well, like, why are you guys questioning cosmology? There's so many things we can predict well. The model works so well. We can explain things with Earth revolving around the sun and Earth having a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles at the equator and all these things they say. The problem is what they don't say, which is grant me these miracles. Grant me these miracles of dark matter and dark energy, and the fact that we have no unified theory of physics that can reconcile the two leading ones of quantum and relativity. They don't work. So to me, on its face, there's no question that we should be asking questions because the foundations of physics are broken. And you need foundations of physics in order to have a cosmology.
All right, man. All right, show's over. No, I'm just kidding. Good job, man. Drop the mic on that one. Good job. Yeah. So, yeah, all that stuff that you're mentioning is a lot of the stuff that I would I love because when you're talking to those people, you can ask them like, well, how fast, you talked about the Earth's rotation around the sun. How fast does the Earth orbit the sun? And once you tell them that number, because they probably won't know, I don't, you're probably used to this, you tell them, 66,600 miles an hour or 67,000 miles an hour, depending. Or how fast is the Earth chasing the sun? Oh, it's actually chasing it at 440,000 miles an hour. And then they're like, what? They already know about the 1,000 mile an hour spin, which is no problem for them, right? And then you were talking about that. Yeah, there's so many theories that you need that you can't see, right? It's just you're just being told about them, and then you're not told about that other section about the whole 96%. So most people just think that everything's already figured out and we're good. But
Mm-hmm.
once you start listening to people like yourself or like Witsit, who does more of the scientific aspect, and he does a very good job when he's debating, and it sounds like you're also on that same track, where you're just kind of basically peeling back the onion. The onion's there on the surface level, everything looks like it's perfect, fine and dandy. But then when you start peeling back the onion, then if they have to answer like some deep questions, you're finding out, like you said, 10 to the 26 or 20th power. I mean, that's just insane, bro. And then 90 and then for dark matter to have to be there for everything to be copacetic, like they say, is also another thing. But it's the same thing, man. When you peel back the onion in the Bible, like they say that in 13.6 billion years ago the stars were formed. Then they say 4.6 billion years ago the sun was formed, and then 4.5 billion years ago the earth was formed. Even that right there is not what the Bible says. The Bible says that the earth comes first. Day three, you got the continents, you got the land, you got the vegetation, and then on day four, that's when you have the moon, sun, and the stars, and they're actually placed within the firmament, right? So you already kind of touched on that. So you have the earth coming first, which means it's the central portion, and then you have the moon, sun, and the stars created to light up the earth. Those aren't created to light up Andromeda and all these other things, right? So it's funny because everything that you're explaining from a scientific aspect, they're expecting us to just believe, but those are all theories. And then quantum, also on a quantum level, anybody like me or normal people aren't able to see anything on the quantum level, so we just have to believe that it's lining up anyways. And then also we're not seeing time and and everything bending and warping. You can't see that. So it's just what happened is, I think the Michelson-Morley experiment happened and a couple other things happened. If this is probably what you're going to go kind of into, where they had to come up with the general relativity theory for everything to kind of work out. So they keep on kind of bandaging up everything that's happening from a scientific level with a new theory, instead of coming out with something that you could say absolutely this is a fact, right?
Yes. Yes, but before going into Michelson-Morley, I want to go into the Big Bang a little bit too,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
really
please.
to really hammer home how shaky these foundations are for your audience. Because until these foundations are set, the later equations basically are based on the shaky assumptions, and they're going to be problematic. So I think it's like there's a temptation sometimes to go into the details and have these arguments over things that are sort of downstream, but these are foundational. Dark matter and dark energy. There's something known as a reification fallacy, where you basically speak about something that's an abstraction that hasn't been established to exist, and you speak about it over and over again. Therefore, you reify its existence as if it's real. So we're talking here about dark matter as if it's a real thing, but it might not even exist at all. Same thing with dark energy, and that's 96% of the universe. Another super important one, it is called the inflaton particle. This is something that has to do with the Big Bang, nearly 14 billion years ago, some unimaginably long time ago. That, by the way, like, do we even know what happened last week on the news? Let
Yeah.
alone a year ago, let alone 10 years ago, almost 14 billion years ago. They're saying they seem to have an idea of what happened, that there was a Big Bang and that there was this rapid expansion known as inflation at the early period, which is already inference on top of inference. But even if we accept that to be true, the scientists have had a hard time coming up with a mechanism that could explain how it expanded so rapidly, had this rapid inflation. So they said, well, maybe there was an inflaton particle. Problem is, no one's ever found or seen an inflaton particle.
Of
And
course.
as you said so well, Josh, that you need that Big Bang event to happen because it creates a timeline of Darwinian evolution and all the things that needed to happen with rocks and space and gas giants, stars, galaxies. In order for Earth to be in the place that we're in right now, you need that timeline. And in order to have that timeline, you need things to have happened in a specific way at the Big Bang, which would include rapid inflation, which requires an inflaton that no one has ever found. It's a reification fallacy. They're speaking about an inflaton that's really just hypothetical. So everything else downstream of that is a problem. And like you said, we could just stop the podcast right now if we wanted
Yeah,
to.
yeah, I
Because
dropped the
until they
mic
can
again.
explain until they can explain this stuff to us, don't talk to us about anything else in the cosmos until you have the foundations right. But there's a lot more. So now I want to go forward to what you're saying about the Michelson-Morley study. I think it's an important place to start. This is something I'd maybe heard about in my studies, but I didn't realize how important it was to all of physics and science until I started researching for this book. This was a study in 1887 where, without getting into the details of it, and there's a great lecture on Austin Whitsit's channel, Whitsit Gets It. He interviewed Robert Bennett, who's a physics PhD. He wrote his PhD on Einstein's relativity, comes from an Einsteinian lineage, actually, and now questions all of it. So he's done a good job going to the technical details. But basically, what happened in the study is that the scientists claimed that the way the light was moving in the study disproved the existence of ether. And ether was an ancient concept, a concept believed to be the fifth element. The other ones, earth, air, fire, and water. And this, by the way, is something that Steve Young mentions in his book, A Fool's Wisdom, the theoretical physics PhD I mentioned. He's going back to the elements, including ether. But Michelson-Morley, the alleged conclusion was that what they observed got rid of ether. But the other thing they don't say in that is they got rid of ether and presupposed that Earth is moving. It's like
Yeah.
the unspoken thing. The problem is, if you get rid of that presupposition that Earth moves, and then you look at what happened, there was a small fringe shift observed. Typically, the mainstream will say, well, it was a null result. We didn't get what we were expected, but there was actually this small fringe shift. There was something observed. If you take the fringe shift and say there was this thing observed that was really small and Earth is stationary, then actually everything works with an ether. So
Yeah.
basically, there were two options. The ether exists and Earth is stationary, or there's no ether and Earth is moving. We know where we went. Got rid
Yeah.
of the ether, say Earth is moving. Einstein's relativity came in basically to cover for that. And then we ended up with mainstream physics. But like, wait, let's rewind here, go back to 1887. Maybe they got it wrong. We've got to bring back an ether, which is a background medium that can explain a lot of different observations. It can also explain a very important study. It's known in the mainstream as Airy's failure, also from the 1800s. But if you look at it from the perspective of ether existing and a stationary Earth, then you can explain quote unquote Airy's failure. And as Dr. Robert Bennett says, it's actually Airy's success. Now, this is so important because if ether is a background medium in the nature of reality, then we kind of need to know that in order to get anything else in physics right. But no, we didn't. We stuck with a moving Earth, and then we got rid of the ether and we brought in things like relativity and the bending and warping of space-time and dark matter and dark energy and a Big Bang, all these things based on some potentially faulty foundations.
And like you said like 96% is based on that. The 4% is would be correct. So if you reverse that and you had the ether and you had everything else, like a stationary Earth, I mean, how much more are we would we be on point, compared to have not having to have that, right?
Yeah, and the problem is that mainstream physicists are not funding this kind of research. So all the funding is going toward the ideas that might be wrong, and they're trying to find something that's not there. And the other thing I want to say is that so many of the mainstream claims have never been observed directly. They're all through inference. The Big Bang was not observed. Earth moving around the sun, revolving actually in a state of free fall, allegedly. That means we are literally free falling right now under the mainstream cosmology at over 66,000 miles an hour. Right now, you're free falling, and you're also rotating on a tilted axis on the sphere at roughly 1,000 miles an hour, which is faster than the speed of sound if you're at the equator. But if you're at the poles, it's much slower, but you don't feel it. And then you're also going around the Milky Way galaxy at over 500,000 miles an hour, and we're expanding outward in an ever expanding universe into who knows what at over 1 million miles an hour. And Earth is also wobbling in 4 different ways, and you don't feel any of that. So it's only based on the math basically because no one has ever observed a full sphere of Earth doing a full rotation. No one's ever done a film of Earth free falling around the sun at that speed or any of those other emotions. No one's ever filmed the Big Bang. And we end up with this logical fallacy. It's called affirming the consequent. If X, then Y, Y, therefore X. To simplify that dramatically, first statement, if it rains, the grass outside will be wet. No problems there. Rain causes wet grass. Easy. Second statement's a problem. I observe wet grass, therefore it rained. Why is that a problem? Because there are other things that can cause grass to be wet. Sprinklers, dew, a million things. Someone poured a bucket of water, like who knows? It doesn't have to be rain. But the problem is that it is true that the model of it rained would explain wet grass. So we see this everywhere. The scientists observe something and they say, well, if we had a Big Bang heliocentric spherical Earth model, it would work, that we would observe this. And they might be right. The problem is there are a lot of other models that would also work too. So you end up affirming the consequent over and over again. A good example, the scientists have found a background radiation. It's known as the cosmic microwave background, CMB for short. Actually, a Nobel Prize was awarded, and anyone can Google this. There's a big image of what this background radiation looks like. And the physicists say, this is the background radiation coming from the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. All they did was observe something and then they retrofitted it onto a model. It's like we saw wet grass, therefore it rained. Well, we see wet grass, maybe there are other reasons to explain it. They're doing this over and over again. They have a model that it rained and they're going to force everything into that and not explore anything else. What they also don't talk about is the little anomalies. Is that the cosmic microwave background has some things where it's not fully homogeneous in the way they thought it should be. And actually, it points toward Earth in a special way. Scientists have now called this the axis of evil, an interesting way to interesting thing to call it, an axis of evil, because if what they're observing is correct, it might suggest that Earth occupies a special place in the cosmos, and that goes against fundamental philosophical principles in mainstream cosmology, which is no, Earth is just one rock in a massive universe. Don't worry about it. There's no special place Earth occupies in the cosmos. It's known as the Copernican principle. And there are these little anomalies that start to add up, or wait, actually, this points toward Earth. And I mentioned a bunch of others in my book, scientific papers saying, wait, now the Copernican principle is in question. So, in addition to the problem of affirming the consequent, where we observe something and we force it into an incorrect model, there is this principle of dismissing anomalies, where it's like, well, we can just sweep that under the rug. We've got everything else under control. And the anomalies start to stack up. The problem is that if we want to be strict and actually just normal and logical, if there's a law that says, for example, all swans are white, all has a very specific meaning. It means all, it means 100%. And if we find a single black swan, just one, the model's not correct because the model says all swans are white. We found something that's not a white swan. Therefore, the model's wrong. Same thing with cosmology. If we find an anomaly, that means the model has to change in order to accommodate it. But that's not what seems to happen. It's like there's this like protective layer around the model where it pushes away the anomalies and says, yeah, we acknowledge it. We're not perfect, but we're not going to depart from our model. And in fact, they probably should be.
Yeah, and when those things happen, an anomaly like that, then they create a new particle or a new way to explain it that they can't even prove. And like I said, if you're not digging into this type of stuff, then you're not going to ever find that out. You're just going to believe it, and you're not going to understand that we are off by that amount, you know. And the Big Bang Theory, for example, for all my conspiracy crowd out there, you know, Georges Lemaitre, he was a Belgian cosmologist, Catholic priest, and father of the Big Bang Theory, Jesuit trained. You know, so when you hear the word, you know, if you hear Jesuit at any time, that's a red flag immediately, right? So, and then you move down to evolution. Charles Darwin, it actually came from his grandfather, who was a 33-degree Freemason. So his direct son was actually he was a pastor, right? So he didn't want to probably take on that journey, but Charles Darwin took it, ran with it, and you see that's coming from a 33-degree Mason. So now you have Jesuit trained uh, priest, and then doing one of it, which is the Big Bang Theory, and then you have Charles Darwin, which this is coming from a 33-degree Mason. So there's other things working in the background here, right? And then Copernicus, in some of his writings, I'll just read some of it. It's the De Revolutionibus of the Order of the Heavenly Bodies, and he's supposed to be a bishop or a priest. But if you see how he's explaining the cosmos, you could tell that he's putting more of a Egyptian twist on it. It says,
Mm.
in the middle of all sits the sun enthroned in the most beautiful temple. Could we place this luminary in any better position from which he can illuminate the whole at once? He is rightly called the lamp, the mind, the ruler of the universe. Hermes, Transgressus, names him the visible God. Sophie's Electra calls him the all-seeing. So the sun sits upon a royal throne, ruling his children, the planets which circle around him. The earth has the moon at her service. As Aristotle says in his Animals, the moon has a closer relationship with the earth. Meanwhile, the earth conceives by the sun and becomes pregnant with the annual rebirth. So it's almost like he's putting a godship on it, right? He's calling it the visible lamp. The visible lamp is only one thing that we know in the Bible is going to be Jesus, right? He is the lamp.
Mm.
And even when there's a new heaven and new earth in Revelation, it says that there's no more sun and Jesus will be the lamp, the light. So you can see that there's a spiritual aspect to this, even though the people that are, atheist and all this stuff, they would say there's not. You could tell that there is. So you have Jesuit, and then you have 33-degree Freemason, and then now you have somebody almost putting godship on the sun and saying that it's ruling all the planets. And even at the time that his information came out, you do have Christians that read, that know their Bible, that were saying that it's truly satanic to even say these type of things, right? So yeah, so it all connects together. There's definitely an agenda there, and that's why every time that something new comes up to try to stop this, making us Earth special or created, they created a new particle.
Wow. And there's a documentary I saw and I mentioned in my book. It's called Heliosorcery. And it goes
Mm,
into a little bit of what you're describing. I believe it's on
yeah.
YouTube or Rumble for free. That goes into basically the philosophy of the way they looked at the sun and putting the sun as a central position, because the Copernican revolution, as it's known in science, was such a big deal. And then Galileo came along and he looked through his telescope and he observed some things that allegedly proved heliocentrism. And heliocentrism just means the sun's at the center, heliocentric, versus what an alternative, which is that the Earth is at the center and everything's moving around Earth. Galileo saw in his telescope, and first of all, in my some of my old books, I would mention this and be like, Galileo, I would use him as a comparison, how he went against the mainstream and he was this brave guy, because a lot of people would do that and say it's like Galileo going against the church and proving that Earth revolves around the sun and getting us away from those old archaic beliefs. But what I'd never done is actually looked at what he saw in his telescope. And did he actually prove Copernicus was right, that the sun's at the center? So Galileo saw the phases of Venus, which are sort of like the phases of the moon, which you could explain if the sun is at the center. The problem is you can also explain it another way, which is that if the planets in the sky, the wandering stars, go around the sun while the sun is going around Earth, that is ultimately geocentric, and you could explain Galileo's observation with a geocentric model, not just a heliocentric model. So he didn't prove it. He also saw the moons of Jupiter, smaller bodies going around a bigger one. So, oh, well, Earth is a smaller body going around the sun, which is a bigger body, and therefore what we see with Jupiter and the moons proves heliocentrism. No, not at all. I mean, he's just looking at something in the sky and trying to make conclusions about the ground beneath our feet and our relation to the sun. There are other ways to explain it. So he didn't actually prove heliocentrism, which is pretty amazing. He was just basically affirming the consequent again. He was fitting his observations into one model because he saw wet grass and he says, well, rain causes wet grass, therefore it rained. Oh my goodness, same thing again. And even more broadly, Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking, many other physicists who I quote in my book, they are very open that when you observe the things in the sky above us, you look at the lights, you can't tell whether Earth is at the center or whether the sun is. It's known as a kinematic equivalence. But what's happened because of this philosophical bias, this Copernican principle that, oh, we don't occupy a special place, and maybe there's some dark stuff to that, of the reasons for wanting us to believe those things, because of that bias, the Copernican bias, the scientists have force fit the observations into the heliocentric model and discounted the geocentric possibility that Earth is at the center. So we end up with this Big Bang and an expanding universe, and then holes, dark matter, dark energy, and inflaton particle, things no one's ever found.
Yeah, and Helios is a sun god as well, right? So,
Mm.
and then if you notice, all the planets that are out there are all going to be gods, right? Roman gods, and like Mark was going over, they're called wandering stars in the Bible, and it actually says in the Bible that they're going to be judged. And if you do go
Mm.
back to the Book of Enoch, which is extra biblical text, I'm not saying that this is canon or anything like that. You're going to see that it talks about the stars. One thing, Mark, I wanted to talk to you about is, which is interesting in the Bible, is it actually talks about the stars being, angels being stars. Not all the angels. I'm not saying that every sect of angel, but angels or stars are angels, right? You notice that in the Bible, and what'll happen is people, when they hear that, they'll put it into an allegorical section. But in the book of Isaiah, it actually says that all the host of heaven, which are the stars, would fall to the earth, right? And then if you take that a prophecy and you bring it to the New Testament, you have Jesus, his revelation. In the book of Revelation, it talks about all the stars are going to fall to the earth. And then if you go, so host of heaven mean army, right? It's like God's army. And if you notice, they're revolving and they're doing a certain revolution. And then if you see the planets, they're doing a different revolution, right? So that's why they're called wandering stars. And
Mm.
what happens? Well, the people that name these planets, they end up naming them after Roman gods, right? Jupiter, Mars, all these different names. And then you get deeper into NASA. I don't want to get into all that, but you know what the word NASA means. But if you notice, each one of their missions, they're actually naming it after a Greek god. We have or some other god, So all of it is, there's agendas behind it. Personally, I believe, as a Christian, you believe that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities of evil. And it
Mm.
actually talks about principalities of evil in heavenly places. And if you understand that verse, heavenly places is nothing on the earth. These are actually between earth and heaven, which is going to be, the first heaven, which is where the moon, sun, and the stars are even located. So biblically, the spiritual battles are happening between earth and heaven. Talking about the third heaven where God's throne is located. So it really is interesting how you hear it on a minute level. The spiritual battles are already happening because they're calling these things different gods already, right?
Mm.
So it's really interesting, and it's something that God doesn't want you to fixate on, because he doesn't want you to worship the heavens. He wants you to worship the creator, not the created. But if we notice, uh we are these people that are doing these type of experiments and everything, they're besides the fact they're trying to prove God wrong, they are hyper focused, or it's almost like an idol for them. And it is spiritual because they will, what do? As soon as they say something doesn't work, they just put a new particle. And it's really it's a religion. I know people don't understand that it is, that are atheists and all this stuff. No, it's not. But I mean, understand when you keep doing these things to prove God wrong, then you do have a religion because you can only worship one master, right? You can only worship God, which I love the God of the Bible, but or you can worship his adversary, and they happen to be doing the opposite of worshiping Yahweh.
Well, it's interesting, Josh. I mean, what you're describing aligns so much with my research over these 7 books. And just so your audience knows, I come from more of an atheistic, agnostic background before I started writing. And I had a big spiritual awakening in 2016. I used to work in investment banking in New York. Then I was working in Silicon Valley advising tech companies. So this conversation is so far away from where I used to be. But I departed very drastically starting in 2016 from the atheistic position because I came across so much science of the notion of a soul, and that's a different topic. My first book, an End to Upside Down Thinking, goes into that science. But where I've been drawn since that initial awakening was that we are in a spiritual war. And that's the term that I've been using in my books because there are forces of dark and light. My fourth book, An End to Upside Down Contact, goes into some of those forces, allegations of human contact with non-human intelligences, including what all the ancient scriptures say. There is contact everywhere, that there are forces and they're not always benevolent. So that was where my mind went as well with this cosmology picture of like, wait, what's really going on cosmologically? Is it part of the spiritual war? Is the deception about where we live part of the spiritual war? And then what are those lights in the sky? Are they gas giants that are who knows how many light years away, unimaginably far away, or are they much closer? And maybe they're not rocks that you land on. Maybe there's different things. Because once gravity's out of the picture, we don't have to believe things are of a certain mass or a certain distance. That's all required by gravity and Einstein's relativity. But as we talked about, that stuff's all very shaky. So it does make me wonder what's up there in the sky. How do those things influence our world? I mean, disciplines like astrology, which I'm not as familiar with, all of a sudden it's like, that's an interesting principle because the idea generally is that the lights in the sky are informing what's happening here. And if some of those lights are angelic forces, or maybe darker forces, or maybe some combination, or maybe related to our soul, I'm just throwing out guesses here. Then
Yeah.
wait, we need to pay attention to what's going on up there, not just sit and say, oh, it's so beautiful, which it is. But maybe it's literally some kind of a mapping of the spiritual war or the spiritual realm that we're in.
Yeah, and it says, then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night. Let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, for years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of heavens to give light on the earth. Right. So, besides the fact that it makes earth special, it also says that it's for signs and for seasons. Right. Separate the day from the night is obvious, but it's for signs and for seasons. I mean, the seasons aspect, we obviously totally understand from a scientific portion, but what are the signs aspect? So there is, the Maseroth, which is going to be what you're talking about. So there is some signs that you see in the heavens. If you
Hmm.
notice Jesus when he's talking about what's going to happen in the end times, that the moon's going to be darkened, the sun's going to be darkened, and all of the stars are going to fall to the earth. Okay, so it's really interesting, but like you're saying, yeah. And then the Bible also separates the sun and the moon, saying that there's two great lights, a greater light to rule the day, lesser light to rule the night. There's several verses in there about a fixed and a movable earth, like you were talking about, which is something I think that you believe now. We have First Chronicles 16:30, tremble before him, all the earth, the world is also firmly established, it shall not be moved. We have Zechariah 1:11 says, and they answered the angel of the Lord that stood among the myrtle trees and said, we have walked to and fro through the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. Psalms 96:10 say among the nations the Lord reigns, the world is also firmly established, it shall not be moved. And then Psalms 104:5 says, you have laid the foundations of the earth, so it should not be moved forever. All right, so that's very interesting stuff. And like you were talking about with UFOs, and maybe when you get into that type of stuff, in the book of Daniel, Daniel's actually on the earth and he says a prayer, and an angel goes to give the prayer to God, it seems like it takes 21 days for him to get back. And when he gets back to Daniel, he's actually fasting. So he's wondering what's going on. It's been 21 days. And the angel says that he actually got in a fight, a spiritual battle between heaven and earth with an angel. It was called the Prince of Persia, which
Mm.
obviously, if God's angel is headed to heaven and Prince of Persia is trying to intercept him, then that is not a good angel. That is going to be one of these spiritual host of wickedness in heavenly places. And what happens is he has to call Michael the archangel to come assist him so he can get back down and speak to Daniel. So that's between earth and that's between the third heaven where God's throne is located. What's happening? It's spiritual battles. So I think people need to understand that aspect. They always understand the physical, and it's not odd to them to for someone to tell you, 26 trillion miles away. I know exactly what kind of gas that is. You know what I mean? So if I had like a bucket of gas and I was like, I was standing away from you 10 feet away, you're not going to know what that is. But 26 trillion miles away, how you going to know exactly what gas that is, the mass of it, and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's just inference on top of inference on top of inference. And then we listen to these biblical tales, which many people would say, oh, that's just mythology, that's allegory. But yeah, I ask the question too now, are they speaking literally that we are in a spiritual war? There are these advanced beings and they have been involved in human affairs throughout all of human history. And we're just at a point right now where our science is so far behind that we regard it as mythology because we actually don't have the proper science to explain what's happening. So we end up inverting it. Oh, they were so primitive, they didn't understand what was happening, and they thought that was they're coming up with stories. No, we're the ones that are primitive and don't understand what's happening because we've got dark matter and dark energy and inflatons and everything else after it, and we're presupposing gas giants trillions of miles away that we've never even observed, and that's our mythology. And your point about calling it a religion, I think it's a good one because basically we've moved into a form of a dogma and actually just a belief system that's based on blind faith. It's based on grant me these miracles of a big bang and dark matter and dark energy, and then I'm going to explain everything else. And those same very people, and I used to be one of them, would say, faith-based beliefs, that's not a scientific way to think. And yet all of science is based on these faith-based beliefs. It's so ironic.
Yes, like it's faith-based that there's dark matter out there. It's faith-based that there was a Big Bang. It's faith-based that
Yes.
there was evolution. It's faith-based that everything that's explained. But the thing is, we get taught in school, we get taught that it's a fact, and we get taught not to question it. And that is a very interesting thing because when you start digging into the Bible, and it's more of a 6,600 year span. I'm not saying that's exact. I'm just saying it's not 3.8 billion years. And then you also, like I said, you have the stars coming first in their model. You have the Earth coming first in our model. So our model biblically, we have it being special. He created everything. He created the firmament to separate the waters from waters. He created the firmament also to place the moon, sun, and the stars within. Right, and then he created these stars and the sun and the greater light to rule the day, lesser light to rule the night, specially for us. What? To light up the earth, right? It's not to light up all these other things. And he created the sun. It says in Psalms 19:1 through 6, it's talking about how he created a tabernacle for the sun. And the tabernacle is actually called Jehovah's tent. So it's more of a tent talk, which would be if you have all the stars falling to the earth, like it says in the book of Revelation, and you have a firmament that actually connects to the earth with the moon, sun, and the stars within that firmament, it makes a lot more sense that they can all fall to the earth. But if you
Mhm.
have a heliocentric model or even a geocentric model where the stars are just everywhere and they're supposedly gas giants and they're bigger than our sun, how does that work from a biblical point of view? Well, the way it works is they have to do the exact same thing that these scientists are saying and saying, you know what? He doesn't mean stars, he means meteors, So that's what happens. And I do debate people on this on the biblical cosmology aspect of it. But there's more stuff to it, like in the Bible, it talks about the moon and the sun are moving, and it talks about how the earth is fixed and immovable. And which is
Mhm.
something, I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean, if you go outside and you're standing there, you're able to read a book, you're able to do certain things that someone with motion sickness wouldn't be able to do. If I get into a car with my wife and she reads a book, she immediately gets sick while I'm driving, but she could sit there on the lawn and read the book no problem, right? Because we are not in motion, that's the thing. So yeah, it's just really interesting aspects. But when I like to compare and contrast science to the Bible because I want people to realize exactly what you are exposing, and you're exposing that there's something here, like an agenda or something. And I think right now you're peeling back the onion to a point where you're understanding that there's a spiritual battle and it's always been here. And definitely these entities that you're talking about, which I would believe are fallen angels, demons, the devil, are influencing man.
Yeah.
And the Bible always talks about, like, Jesus always talks about the world. The world is all the people that believe in that system, right? And then Jesus is, different, worshiping God. So that's what that is. And we notice that it is rampant, and they will fight all the way to the death for this cosmology so that it doesn't prove God. So
Hmm.
there's something there that is not just, hey, I have an intuition that it's this. No, it's something there that is spiritual, and I think you're starting to find that out, right, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. That the stakes here are extremely high. It's not just a mistaken scientific belief. And by the way, I don't claim that all scientists are necessarily in on it.
Oh
Many
no.
scientists are just believing the assumptions they learned in school and haven't gone back to ask questions, or they're too afraid to because they could lose their careers, or they're not going to get funding, or they're not going to get the prize that they wanted to get, or they might lose their job. So there's a lot of reasons that people are not going to ask questions. So it might be a small number of people that know this and they're able to manipulate, but like you're saying, Josh, I think it's above the people. It's the people who are being influenced by these darker forces, whatever name we want to use for them, dark forces that influence humankind. And the theme of my first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, it talks about the brain as it relates to consciousness. So we know that we all have consciousness right now, that we're all aware, we're having an experience of life. The question is it something that pops out of the brain that causes us to have that experience? Or alternatively, is the brain more like an antenna, receiver, transmitter, and that we could be influenced by other forces? There's a book called The Science of Channeling by Helene Wabe. This notion of channeling, that other entities, non-physical entities, can actually basically enter our body and then speak out through us. They're not necessarily good entities, but there's a lot of scientific evidence that this is a real thing. I say all that to suggest that, in contrast to where I used to be 10 years ago, I think it's very possible that our thoughts and our actions could be influenced in very subtle ways on a metaphysical sense, that our brain is almost tapping into that. And if we're not careful, in terms of aligning with the truth, or maybe going along with mainstream narratives or behaviors that will take us away from the truth, and we might be influenced by these darker forces. So I think it is a very serious game where our attention is, and the mind control of what we learned in school and what we see in the media. It's all influencing us in a very certain specific direction, which I now see from a different perspective, where I think there's a lot of dark influences at play. I also think there are light influences as well, that of let's say the good side, or that support a broader notion of love, which seems to be embedded within the nature of God itself. That's another inference that I've come to, that the core nature of reality is ultimately benevolent, and we just have to be able to tap into it. And there's this darker force that's obstructing it constantly and inverting and getting in the way of it. So it's our task to set that intention of how we're going to live our life, and have highly moral principles, and be aware of the deception, the wolf in sheep's clothing, to see through all of it. And this cosmology piece seems fundamental, because if we can be misled as to where we live, if we think we're just in this insignificant speck in a massive, ever expanding universe that's all random and meaningless, you get rid of God, you get rid of a higher intelligence, you get rid of spirituality potentially, versus Earth occupies a special place. There is a higher intelligence that created it, and there is a spiritual war at play, and we're highly significant as human beings. That changes everything. So it would make sense, if you were a dark force, to want to steer us astray, and give us a false cosmology.
And start when you're in kindergarten, or actually start before you're in kindergarten now with iPads to
Yeah.
start enforcing this. And then what happens is it's like a block wall between you and the book of Genesis, I would say. And it's a full on attack on the book of Genesis. So what happens is you learn all this information. And as you're going through, elementary school, the middle school, the high school, you're already kind of moving away from God already, right? Because you're getting to a party stage or whatever stage. Maybe you're not, maybe you are doing, like, just going to Princeton or however you're doing it. But as you're learning all this stuff, it's actually building block walls between you and the scriptures, which I believe is how the earth was created. It actually says it right there. And then what happens is, by the time you do pick up the Bible, and if you've been through all this indoctrination, by the time you get to college, let's say you're like 25 or 30, you pick up the Bible, you start reading the book of Genesis, and everything that you've learned, you're going to turn all the stuff you're reading in Genesis into an allegory and place it to the side. It's poetic, it's this.
Mhm.
So you're not taking everything literally, or you're not taking it as if it was a true event because of everything you've learned scientifically. And then if you don't take the time to break things down like you're doing or like Witset's doing, where you're finding all these inconsistencies, you're just going to believe the science, right? And it says in Romans 3:4, let God be true and every man a liar, right? So we're not really supposed to do that. And when I do speak to Christians that are more in the scientific side of what the mainstream scientific side, it's hard for them to grasp that. They will turn things into allegories, poetry, and they will lean more towards that side because it's not explained scientifically. But what I think you should do is you should filter science through the Bible, which is the truth for me. I'm not saying everybody should because everybody's not Christian, but filter science through the Bible, and whatever is comes out, don't believe the scientific side because the Bible is the truth, right? And I think you're kind of unraveling that spiritual side, and you're unraveling certain things where I know you're maybe not there yet, but at some point you're going to find out that wow, the Bible is true. Because I hear you talking about spiritual battles, and Ephesians 6 was one of the verses I was talking about. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. I talked about that earlier. Spiritual host means armies. So there's actually armies of principalities that are against us. And if you talk about the book of Enoch, the Nephilim, they died, and their off or their soul is actually going to be the demons, right? Called the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. I'm not
Mm.
saying that that's 100% accurate, but that's what it does say, and that's the train of thought and the thinking that they had at that time. So now we have demons we're dealing with, and we're also having spiritual hosts of wickedness, and then we're also having men in power that are I think doing deals or dealing with the spiritual host of wickedness. And then we obviously have the devil, which everybody would some people would say, oh, he doesn't exist, which is exactly what he wants. But we have all these things that we're dealing with, and on a spiritual level that a lot of people are not understanding. So there's a lot to it, but I hope, man, I hope that you at some time just find out that the world's upside down, and the Bible's true at some point, man.
Yeah, like I said, it's just one of those explorations I haven't. It takes time to go through all that, and I'm
Of
I'm
course.
open-minded to everything. So, but I appreciate all the insights because there's a lot of alignment for
Of
sure.
course.
And what I've found when I first started this exploration, I had a naive view of what evil is, and I thought it was just murder and mayhem, which is part of it, but I discounted the deceptive part. It's almost like there's a subconscious belief in a lot of people that if something were evil, we would be able to know about it and it wouldn't escape us. And now I see evil as fundamentally deceptive. That's when it wins, when it convinces you that it's benevolent when it's actually not, and it inverts everything. That just seems to be the world we're in today. So it would make sense that the darker forces would want to obscure what they are and not make themselves obvious, or at least to those who are not looking for it. Because for those of us who can see, the world is clearly infiltrated by a lot of evil. But I could understand also from my old worldview that you wouldn't see it. So that's an important thing to know that deception is a real thing. It's fundamental to the world that we live in, and we can't just look at the surface level appearances of anything. We have to always scratch beneath the surface. And actually, my fifth book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, where I talk about the WEF and their agenda, I get into a broader topic of basically the weaponization of compassion, where people can be convinced to support things that sound really nice, but they're actually harmful because they haven't discerned. So I talk about the distinction between blind compassion, which can be dangerous, versus compassion with discernment. And that's really what we need is to, of course, we want to be compassionate. And I think that's a core spiritual principle. But if we're not being discerning, then we might actually think we're being compassionate, but supporting something that's very harmful.
Yeah. Created by somebody that's very harmful, and it
Yes.
could it could be an event, an action, and they're playing on your emotions, like that they're playing on the heartstrings of your emotions, and it's almost like it's unhumane for you to be against this type of thing. So that
Yes.
they create a problem, it's problem action solution, but even going back to, I'm not saying that it's 100% a false flag, but it's something that I studied that I was just like, this exact scenario would work within your frame of reference that you're talking about. would be something like Sandy Hook or something like that, you know. Not saying that it's 100% fake, but if you actually look into it, if it was fake, this is exactly what they did. You know, their 26 children are dead. So everybody, as soon as you mention like, hey, this could be, you know, there was a lot of conspiracy theories at the time about it, but that's some kind of scenario that's like that. Also with the 2020, everything we went through with that, that's
Mhm.
another thing that they use compassion against us. And I'm sure in your book, you probably went over a lot of different things, but yeah, it is um, very deceptive. And also, I mean, it's into not even to a level that's, you know, where someone just lies to you, but there's just like levels to it and layers to it where you're just like, damn, that's just wrong to do that, you know? So yeah, it's really interesting, man. But I love all your mindset, and I love you know, the way you're going with it. You know, you got 7 books, probably so you're probably from where you first started to now, totally changed. And you know, willing to accept maybe the spiritual aspect. So yeah, I hope that happens. But I have to ask you, man, what did you think about the final experiment? I was
Hmm.
actually gonna go. I came in 4th place. I signed up for the golden ticket, you know, and I was also gonna go if Witsit didn't go. So Pastor Will Duffy, I emailed him back and forth, and he wasn't sure if Witsit was gonna commit. So I talked to Jaron, and I was like, hey Jaron, would you be cool with me going if he doesn't go? So I was actually in the golden ticket. I almost went, but what's your thoughts on that? And how did that affect anything that of your research?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you my thoughts, and this is as an outsider. I'm not really in the community. I don't know people that well or the dynamics, so I'm really curious to hear your opinion since you're much closer to it. But so the quote unquote final experiment, as it's been called, that was December of 2024. My book came out August, September of 2024. And I mentioned the 24-hour sun in the southern hemisphere in the book briefly. And one of the things I said is that regardless of what people observe, if they go, is we're going to need a lot of replications and independent validation because there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
debate over this. Um, to me, it's the name, the final experiment, is a misnomer because it's not an experiment. It should be called the single observation, TSO. Maybe we should rebrand it because objectively, that's what it is. It's not TFE, it's TSO, the single observation. They observed something in one location, which is also, I think, a problem because Antarctica is supposedly a massive place. Even on the globe model, it's a massive continent at the bottom of the globe on a more topographical plane. Some would say that it's an ice wall, a circle around the perimeter. In any event, it's a big place. So to say that you observe something in one location, it's like I went to San Francisco and therefore I know all about all of North America. We
Wow.
need to have a lot of independent validation at different locations. And I know there's some people who think that even the final experiment was faked and there was stuff there. I mean, I don't know enough. I've heard Witsit talk about it a bunch, and the way he's debated so openly about it, as someone who speaks publicly, he has a lot of candor. So I believe that he went there and observed something. Um, I've heard Dave Weiss talk about the idea that maybe the sun was projected. That's something I haven't looked into enough, that there was something
Yeah.
there, but it was actually projection. Like, I don't know about that. But let's just take all that aside. Let's assume they went to this one location and they did observe 24-hour sun in the sky, which is something that you would expect on the globe model. Why is that a problem? Just from a strict logical perspective. It's like, well, if the globe model were true, then you would have a 24-hour sun in Antarctica in the southern hemisphere summer. Statement one. It's true that the globe model would predict that. But just like with wet grass, if I observe wet grass, does that mean it rained? No, not necessarily. I observed a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, therefore it's a globe? Not necessarily. There might be other ways to explain it. And I know Joe Hanvey's had a model that would talk about basically the light moving through the firmament or some kind of a superfluid medium. You could end up with these little eddies where it looks like it's 24-hour sun. I've heard people talk about multiple suns potentially. Like I don't know. The problem is that one observation doesn't prove a model. A model that can explain an observation accurately isn't necessarily the correct model. So there's all kinds of logical fallacies here. And I worry a bit that it's just that the outcome of this is distracting from all the other issues we've talked about. Like, bring us back to dark matter. Please explain that. Please explain the Big Bang and so much other stuff. So it seems like it's caused a divide in the community, which I don't even feel like I'm in the community because I don't know everyone. But it's like now a lot of people are leaving the globe skepticism because they think that the globe was proven by one observation when it doesn't get rid of all the other anomalies. So that's kind
Yeah.
of where I am. I would love to see more people go from different backgrounds to different locations in Antarctica and let's
Yeah.
see what happens there in those other locations. But that's where I am. What do you think, Josh?
Well, I would say this. There is a lot of people that feel like it was faked and all that stuff, but I had a guy that was on my show, and he I was basically talking to him the whole show. He has no dog in the fight. He's not a anything. He doesn't have anything to do with cosmology in any way. And behind him was a picture of penguins and him there. And what he kept on telling me is, "You can tell that I travel, but look at my wall." And all I could do is focus on that picture. And I was like, "I'm gonna wait until the end to ask him this question." And I just was waiting and waiting and waiting. We were talking about something totally different. We're talking about spiritual gifts and healing and all this different things. And I'm like, this is just so inappropriate for me to ask. I gotta wait to the end. Just wait. I was patiently waiting. And I asked him, I said, okay, I see that you've traveled. So I see that picture in the background and it looks like penguins. I was like, that the only place I would think is you're in Antarctica. He says, yeah, I was in Antarctica. I was like, let me ask you a question. Where were you at? He didn't say he was at Union Glacier, but he was at another place. But he did tell me, I said, did you see a 24-hour sun? He said he saw a 23-hour sun. It just goes, behind like a mountain for only like 45 minutes. Which is exactly what they said about Union Glacier. I don't know if Jaron, when he was talking about, he said that for 2 hours it goes behind a mountain, but it doesn't set. It just goes behind a mountain. So it was
Okay.
information where I was like, okay, that is for me that, and I'm not saying that it's not like, the CIA is going to send some guy to come interview. I'm going to interview, on my little show, and he's going to just be like, he has this big picture. They're like, I can't wait for you to ask. That's not what happened. That's somebody that's completely independent. He has not. He's not a flat earther or anything like that. He's just a guy that was on here talking about spiritual gifts, and that kind of does that make it 100% true? No, but it gives me like some proof that I think that it is there. Jaron also. I don't care what anybody says about Jaron. I talked to him before. I've been in contact with him still. I still talk to him because, dude, I'm a Christian, bro. What my job is to plant seeds, and my job is to lead people to Christ. My job is not to tell people you're a liar and all this and judge other people to make it so they don't come to Christ. Because for me, I'm trying to attract people to Christ. So I speak to Jaron still. I'm trying to get Whitson on the show. I don't have that aspect of marrying the Bible to the AE map, and that's what happened. A lot of people that claim that it's fake, what they did is they took the AE map where Antarctica is around the outside, and then they married it to the Bible, and then they're making it so that if there's a 24-hour sun, that it has to be a lie because the Bible says this. When in actuality, that's exactly what you're talking about, affirming the consequence. Like the AE map is a man-made thing that's actually
Mhm.
the Earth or the globe squished, and then Antarctica ending up on the outside. So it's a projection, right? So I don't do that. So my whole thing is the Bible doesn't claim anything about Antarctica. First of all, the Bible does talk about the sun doing a circuit in the heaven, a race, like a strongman to run a race. But it doesn't mean that the race is the racetrack isn't exactly a circle. It could be doing something different.
Mhm.
So my whole thing is just like you said, I would need more people to go. I would need more, to look from different angles of Antarctica and all that stuff. But I'm not necessarily under the anymore saying that the AE map is true. And I just say that if it is true, let's say the final experiment is 100% on the up and up, and we get more observations, and there is a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, all that does is it disproves the AE map. It
Right.
takes secular flat Earth and it just throws it out, and it turns into biblical cosmology is where it's at, and that's what I believe. So at this moment, I still believe there's a firmament. I still believe that the moon, sun, and the stars are in the firmament. I still believe that the firmament is solid, and that's just where I'm at this moment. So I'm kind of like you. I think I need more stuff, but I don't think it's necessary whatsoever. Like if I had you on the show right now, Mark, and you were telling me like, hey, I believe that it's geocentric, but it's a globe. Like it would be so inherently wrong for me to just be like, "Oh, Mark, everything you said right now, I'm going to throw it out the window because you believe in a globe." That's not the way it works, man. You have to
Right.
be nice, and you have to, in order for us to get down to the bottom of this, then we need to make sure that we're accepting information from different people and find out why Jaron flipped. Like, why did Jaron even flip in the first place? And see exactly what evidence has caused him to flip to back to a globe and heliocentricity, and then try to break those evidences down so that we can counteract it or at least have an answer for it. So flat Earth is only about 10 years old as far as like coming back. So we really have 10 years of research from most of the people that are in it. And so we're not going to have an answer for everything at this moment. But I think it's just important for us to treat people with kindness, with compassion. And if somebody turns to a globe, it doesn't mean that you have to like to just, bash them, call them liars and they're idiots or whatever. It has to be, we have to treat people with compassion and also kind of continue to research. And that's it. That's what it's about.
Ye- Yeah, I feel the same way. There's a lot of infighting I've seen from afar, and that can be destructive too. And just because someone believes something, can't throw out everything about that person.
Of course.
Everyone's on their own evolutionary journey. We don't know what they're going through in their life. So I try to keep that stuff in mind. I think about myself. I mean, my second book, An End to Upside Down Living, it's not about cosmology, but I had a spinning globe on the cover, not to try to prove a point. It had to do with like our interconnectedness. It was just sort of like a symbolic thing. And someone could look at that and say, okay, Mark, like, don't listen to anything he says. But we're all evolving. So we have to keep that in mind. And we also need to keep our mind on what the truth is and really understand what happened in the final experiment that we can validate, what is still uncertain. I mean, even if we accept the entire trip to be real, um, all that happened was they observed something in the sky, and then they're making inferences about the ground beneath our feet based on something in the sky. If we wanted to prove where we live, we would need to observe that. And that means we would need to have footage from far away to be able to see the full Earth. We don't have that. That would be the best way to do it. Otherwise, we're always going to run into affirming the consequent. We're going to observe something and then create a model around it to try to explain that. And we're probably going to be limited in the model that we come up with. So, like you say, we end up ultimately just falsifying certain models, but not necessarily honing in on exactly what's true. And that's okay. I mean, Austin Whitsitt does a really good job with this when he says, falsification is independent of replacement, meaning you can point to something and say, I know that's not true, but I can't tell you exactly what is true. And that leaves you in a place of saying, I don't know exactly what's true. So a lot of these observations are important because they might falsify something and they might narrow down the possibility set, but it doesn't necessarily tell us, okay, now all of a sudden the heliocentric globe model is true. That's a leap in logic to me.
Yes. They need to prove dark matter, all this other stuff first. And to be honest, like the flat earth portion has also become an idol for people as well. I think that that's definitely true. And for myself, man, for a long time, I would that would be like my crutch. I kept biblically going back to flat earth, flat earth, flat earth. And what I do now is I have a Sunday service, Wednesday service show where I'm reading through the Bible and I'm already I'm already through the Torah. I'm to Joshua on one end, and then the other one I'm all the way to John. So when I started reading through the whole entire Bible, I realized that I was holding on to that biblical cosmology or that flat Earth as almost an idol. And it happens, but we it's important definitely to point out the discrepancies and to point out the evil and expose evil, like Ephesians 5:11 says. But it's also important to go through the whole entire Bible because there's so many different chapters in the Bible, so many different books in the Bible, so many different things that we need to grasp. And yes, we don't need to get stuck in Genesis the whole time. So it has become an idol. That's why you see infighting and people fighting with each other, even Christians fighting against each other, which I think is the devil. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying
Yeah.
to cause division. He's trying to cause people to fight, and his plan worked. And also, Pastor Will Duffy, I spoke to him, before he went on the trip. I really haven't spoke to him too much after the trip, but we also need to we need to have a level of respect for anybody that is a pastor, and I don't think people need to bash him. Some people say that he's a demon, he's this, he's that. I just think that we need to understand that God is watching. God is he could see us at every moment. So if you were in church or you were standing in front of a pastor, you wouldn't say that to him, or you wouldn't say
Mm.
that in church. But God is watching, which is way more important than a pastor watching. So we need to understand that we need to tread lightly and don't judge people. That's not our job. Our job is to lead people to Christ. So that's what I would say to the Christian community. Understand that. And yeah. And Mark, hey man, I love the show, bro. I really had a good time with you. But like I always ask, what is there anything else that you would like to go over that you kind of missed out on that you think is important for my audience?
Maybe just a few tidbits on challenges to the globe model, and I'll rattle a few off. My book has a whole chapter on this, But things where the globe model is very specific in terms of the shape of Earth, not even talking about the heliocentrism or Earth's motion or the Big Bang or dark matter, but there's a specific belief right now, which is that Earth is an oblate spheroid shape with a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles at the equator. And yet people consistently seem to observe things that should be blocked by the curvature in the same way that you would try to see around a bend and you couldn't because it would be blocked by something physical. If Earth is this oblate spheroid, there should be things that are blocked by the curve of Earth. And consistently people can do that. The mainstream counter argument is that it's just the refraction of light. So the light is bending up and it's a mirage. You're not actually seeing it. But people can consistently see things that should be blocked by so much curvature. That on its own is a very big problem for the globe. There's also something known as the Selenelian eclipse. It's a type of lunar eclipse where on the globe model, Earth is in the middle and the sun and the moon are on the opposite side. So Earth is causing the shadow on the moon. But you can see during the Selenelian eclipse, the eclipsed moon and the sun above the horizon at the same time. That's a big problem because wait, Earth's supposed to be in the middle that's causing the shadow. So what's the mainstream argument? I mean, I quote a scientific outlet that says this seems impossible. What they say is it's refraction. What you're looking at is a mirage. I mean, it gets very far-fetched. They're known as post hoc rationalizations. And I list a bunch of other ones in the book. The point is there are things you can do to challenge the very specific claim of Earth's radius. And it leaves us again in a place of saying, well, what we've done is we've falsified this model. We don't know exactly what's true on that basis. There might be some other shape, but there are a lot of challenges that mainstream cosmologists don't typically acknowledge. And I would just close by saying this topic, it might sound like well, who really cares? Because it's just we're talking about the cosmos and we have to deal with day-to-day activities in life, which I agree with. But having this context for where we live, for me, it's been a very freeing experience for some reason to say, oh, wow, so many of my beliefs are based on faulty logic. And now it feels like an expansion in my life. Even though it's about cosmology, it has ultimately been an inward journey for me. So if your audience is somewhat newer to this topic, I don't know, I would say there's a lot of value in exploring it if there's time.
And then also you went to Princeton. Were you ever like did you ever hear of like the Ivy Club or any type of secret society there? Did you and I know you have to get tapped for that, but I'm just asking because I did a whole show on secret societies in college and in high school, which is crazy. You know, like high school, the college preparatory places, they actually have secret societies as well. I just have to ask,
Yeah.
did you ever I know that there's fraternities, but I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about secret societies.
Yeah, good question. I wasn't in one, so
Okay.
I don't know if they existed. I heard about some kind of like secret groups that were not secret sometimes. So I don't even know what's what because I wasn't part of them. There are things called eating clubs. There's a street in Princeton where people go out and party, and some of them are exclusive where you have to be invited in basically, and others where you can just join. So I mean, I have lots of friends that were in all the eating clubs. I don't know of anything that happened, but I don't know.
Just
Like you could have groups within groups. I never experienced any of that stuff. I was on the tennis team, so like that was a big part of my life, just constantly training for that and doing um, really focused on academics. So
right.
I have no direct experience, but when you get in these elite crowds, who knows what's going on? You can have secretive stuff. I
Yeah.
just don't. I have no direct experience of it or no knowledge of it
Oh,
myself.
cool. All right. Yeah, just I just wanted to ask that before we closed, but thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Mark. And I think I'll try to get Witsit on. I'm kind of in contact with one of his friends, JT, Run Boston Bear. So I'm just trying to get a hold of Witsit. Want to get him on as well. And he probably have a very similar aspect as you, you know. So I appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Josh.
Thank you for coming on. So, can you please shout out where they could find you, your Instagram, your YouTube, your show that you have, so that people can find you?
Sure. My website is my name, markgober.com, markgober.com. It has all my info, but all seven of my books are on Amazon in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats. I narrate all the audibles myself. My podcast series is from 2019, and it's about consciousness in the brain and is there an afterlife? Are psychic abilities real scientifically? Where is My Mind is the name. It's 8 episodes. It's something you can binge pretty quickly. Of course, some of my views about like Galileo and some of the medical things have shifted. So there are a few comments I made that were based on old beliefs, but the core of what I discussed there, the science of basically spirituality, I think is super profound. So that would be a good entry point if you're interested in consciousness. And my Instagram. and Facebook, X. It's all Mark Gober author.
Perfect. All right, perfect. Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much for joining me. And everybody that's listening, we started a Patreon. I forgot to tell you guys. Okay, so one thing I haven't told my audience yet, we started a Patreon, Josh Monday Christian Conspiracy Podcast. If you guys want to check that out, it's going to be linked below. So if you guys want to support the ministry, I really appreciate that. It took me a long time, I've already been doing this for about 4 years to even start a Patreon. And yeah, and just wanted to let you guys know about that. And then also, if you guys are listening on audio, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube, it's Josh Monday Music and Podcast. And also check out the two shows that I'm doing. I have Sunday service and Wednesday service. Sunday service is available on Cult of Conspiracy Podcast, and Wednesday service is also available on Cult of Conspiracy Podcast. So if you could, brother, you could just exit out, and then I'm gonna do like an exit with my audience.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Josh.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
brother.
it.
God
Good
bless you, bro.
talking to
Have
you.
a blessed day, dude. Thank you.
You too.
All right. Yeah, so what a wonderful episode, you guys. You guys kind of get the scientific side. Obviously, when I end an episode, if somebody's not Christian, then I don't, and I'm not going to necessarily pray with them. First of all, it could be, uh, you know, they could be maybe praying to a different God, or, maybe he's just, that could make him feel uncomfortable, right? So what I do is when I know someone's not Christian and they don't declare that, then I basically let them exit out, and then I just take it from here. So what we're going to do is we're going to end this in prayer. So let's do that. So Father God, in the name of Jesus, I want to pray, Lord, in Yeshua the Mashiach's name, in Jesus' name, that you help people to be more compassionate that are in this community, the cosmology community, the flat earth community, or Christian flat earth, or biblical cosmology, whatever it is. They help them to be more compassionate, Lord, and more delicate when they're speaking about certain people, not so judgmental. Uh, Please help us to stop the division that is here. And also help us to teach correctly, Lord. If we're teaching the Bible in the incorrect way in any way, please help us to teach it correctly. And I really appreciate everything you do for us, Lord. Thank you so much. And if there's anybody out there that needs any prayer right now, you know who needs it. We want to pray for them. Anybody that has any deficiencies happening right now as far as alcoholism, drug addiction, any type of lust, anything like that. I just want to pray that you break those chains. And Lord, I just want to say thank you so much for everything you do for us. We appreciate you. In Jesus' name, amen. Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate you guys. And I really had an awesome time. So, like I always say, God bless you. Thank you. And I love you.